main point of Ecclesiastes 8 is that resisting, rebelling against, or overthrowing government leaders will not fix the problem of vanity in life. I think this connects back to chapter 7 and verse 7 when he says, oppression makes a wise man mad. It's so difficult to see corrupt leaders in power, oppressing people who have no power and no influence and no ability to defend themselves. And the temptation might be to think if we can just get new rulers in power, that will put an end to all injustice and oppression. But that's just not true. And so in this chapter, he tells us to be wise by accepting the injustice of wicked rulers and not letting it drive us mad, because there's nothing we can do about it. Instead, you just deal with it and you realize that one day God will bring these leaders to justice. And so in verse 1, who is like the wise man and who knows the interpretation of a matter? A man's wisdom illumines him and causes his stern face to beam. At the end of the last chapter, he acknowledged it's very rare to find a wise man. It's like 1 in 1,000. But when you do see a wise man, he's someone whose face can shine even under the worst circumstances, because he has this inner peace and acceptance of life's vanity, and he's not constantly striving to fight against it. And part of being a wise man in verses 2 through 4 is submitting to the king, whether you agree with the way he's running his kingdom or not. First of all, because you made an oath before God to serve this king. And he says, don't rush to leave this king and to throw away your allegiance to him. And certainly don't join in an evil matter. This could be joining in a mutiny against the king to overthrow his rule. It could be joining in an assassination attempt. Instead, he says, accept the fact that the king is going to do whatever he pleases. Whether you like it or not, the king is doing what he believes is for the best benefit of him and his kingdom. Even if it's not right, that's his prerogative as king. And since he's the one in authority, you don't have the right to question what he's doing. This rubs us the wrong way as Americans, because we always speak out against those in power, and we can vote this guy out of office. But in the ancient world, you couldn't do those things. If you speak out against the king, all you're going to do is make oppression worse for yourself and potentially for those you're speaking out on behalf of. And so he says in verse 5, he who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble, for a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. There may have actually been a proper time and a proper procedure to go through if you wanted the king to hear you out. But fools just rush in and they disobey the king and they try to overthrow him, and all they do is bring down trouble for themselves. So Solomon is not advocating for cowardice, where you never stand up to authority or speak your mind, but he's calling for wisdom to realize you are not the king, and how he rules his kingdom is not up to you. He does what he pleases, and you can't just waltz into the throne room and question his rulership and disobey his commands. In verse 6, because our trouble is heavy upon us and we feel the burden of oppression and wicked rulers, we often want to rush in to fix that problem immediately, and we'll do whatever it takes to overthrow this ruler and to stop the oppression. But if we don't use wisdom and strategy and timing and proper procedure for these things, we're just going to make the trouble even heavier upon us. And instead of fixing the problem of oppression, we just make things worse. In fact, verse 7 is a great principle here. If no one knows what will happen, who can tell him when it will happen? We make this assumption that if we can just get this ruler off the throne, well, then the oppression will cease and times of delight will come. But we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we certainly don't know when it's going to happen. So let's say we do overthrow a wicked ruler, and then another ruler replaces him who's even more wicked than he was. Now what? Or maybe we do replace a wicked ruler with a righteous one. Who's to say how long his reign is going to last before he's replaced by another wicked ruler after him? Oppression and evil and unjust rulers are a part of this sin-cursed world. It's a part of what makes life vain, and you cannot fight against it. Verse 8, no man has authority to restrain the wind with the wind. Trying to put an end to all unjust rulership in this world is like grasping for the wind. And it's an even more powerful image because we're trying to grasp the wind using wind. We're trying to capture wind with strategies that are completely useless. And if a king determines that it's the day of our death, we have no authority to say that it's not. And if a king decides we're going to war, it's useless to try to fight against that because he's an authority and we're not. And turning to evil will not save us from evil and oppression. And in verse 9, he says, this is just the way life life is. There will always be people wielding their authority for their own benefit and for the hurt of others. And one of the reasons there will always be wicked rulers in this world is because future generations forget how wicked they were, and they become wicked rulers just like them. It's like we don't learn from history at all. Some translations render the word forgotten as praised. The idea there is you might have a wicked ruler, but in their death, everyone just remembers all the good things and all the great building projects and how good he was for the economy, but they forget about how evil he was, and so in future generations, that evil is on repeat in rulers to come. And he returns in verses 11 through 13 to what he talked about at the end of chapter 7, how evil we are. That's why you can't fight against the inevitable oppression from rulers, because human beings are evil, especially when the sentence against our evil deeds are not executed quickly. Now that's true in our own lives. Sometimes we can do wickedness and get away with it for weeks or months or even years. And so it emboldens us to keep doing it. But if you think about it in the context of rulers have no one to hold them accountable. In fact, back in chapter 5 and verse 8, remember he said, don't be surprised at wicked rulers because one official watches over another official and there are higher officials over them. So they're all working together and nobody's holding anyone accountable. And so everybody in a position of leadership can get away with their wickedness for a really long time. And it just emboldens them to be even more evil. But in the end, Solomon knows God is going to take care of this. God is going to bring down these wicked rulers. In verses 12 and 13, even if a sinful ruler does evil 100 times and lengthens his life, it's not going to go well for him. And if you're one of the poor and the oppressed and the afflicted, it will still go well with you as long as you fear God. Because despite the horrendous circumstances you're facing in life, your face that would normally be stern and gloomy can shine and beam, like he said back in verse 1. In verse 14, part of being wise is just accepting the fact that wicked rulers are sometimes going to be rewarded in this life and treated as if they were righteous, even though they're not. And righteous people are going to be punished and treated as though they're wicked when they're not. And it's only once you can accept that and stop fighting against it and trying to overthrow every wicked ruler that reigns that you can actually enjoy life in verse 15 and eat, drink, and be merry and realize that all of this political leadership is out of your control. And instead of being driven mad by oppression, we can enjoy the good gifts of God along the way. And in verses 16 and 17, there may be someone who claims to be wise enough to understand this life and why it's so baffling and to hold the secret to how to make sure life is not vain anymore. But he says it doesn't matter how much you give yourself over to wisdom, you'll never be able to figure this life out and you'll never be able to discover the secret to fixing the vanity of life. And so the truly wise thing to do is to stop trying to explain it or to fix it, but to just accept it for what it is so that the oppression won't drive you mad. And so the application for us is do not let politics drive you mad. Part of the problem with our democratic system in America is that it gives us the illusion of control. We think we have more power to influence our leaders than we actually do. And I'm not saying, nor would Solomon say, that you shouldn't try to influence them. No, we can use the proper times and procedures to try to make a difference in how our leaders lead. But he would tell us to make sure you know the difference between what you can control and what you can't. And so many Christians drive themselves mad by watching the news all day. And the thought is, if I can just get my candidate into office, well then all the evil and the oppression will stop. But that's just not true. Why? Because they're human beings and they are sinful. And it doesn't matter who we put into office, there's always going to be evil. There's always going to be injustice. And if we keep fighting against it, thinking we can actually change the vanity of this life and eliminate all evil and oppressive rulers, we're just going to drive ourselves insane. And it's going to suffocate our faith, and we're not going to be able to enjoy the good gifts of God because we will be vexed by the evil people in power. And this points to Jesus because he knew the most important thing was not to overthrow Pilate or to get Herod off the throne. It was to fear God and to obey him. And even at Jesus's trial, when he's standing in front of all of these rulers, you see a quiet resignation. He's not sitting there fuming about how evil these rulers are and how could they do this to him and life is just so unfair. In his wisdom, he accepts that this is always going to be the way it is in this life. You're always always going to have evil people abusing their power and using their authority for the hurt of others. And that's exactly what they did to him, even putting him on a cross. And yet, because of his wisdom, his face could still beam, even while hanging from a beam, because he knew as long as he feared God, it would be well with him in the end. And if they didn't repent, those evil rulers would face God's judgment. And so our prayer today is, Father, help me care about oppression and to pray for those who are oppressed and afflicted. But please, Lord, let it not drive me mad. Let me not think that I have more control over politics than I actually do, but to realize that you are the one in control. And as long as I fear and trust you, things will all work out in the end when you bring justice down on all of life's oppressors.